This video series is brought to you by USCP. I was not paid to say or do anything, they just supplied me with all the necessary parts to turn these builds into M3s. Before we start the video, I want to apologize about the possible flickering you might see on the screen. This is because of the LED light panels I have in the roof of my new office, and they are not really working well together with the GoPro I'm using to film this stuff. I'm still trying to figure out which settings I need to use in order to get rid of it most of the way. As far as I know by now, this is the most I can get it out of the way without going to a 4K video setting, which is probably pretty useless, but we'll see maybe if that fixes the problem. We will stick to that. If you have any experience with this and have an idea how to fix this without changing all of the lights in the room, because that's not an option, then I would like to at least see that in the comments down below. Now back to the video. So as you can see, I started on the build. I had to remove the side skirts in order for them to be changed to the M side skirts. So those were scribed out and then removed, and then I could just move on to gluing the new body kit in place. Both areas that were supposed to be glued together got some sanding with a sanding stick to rough it up a bit. Then I applied some glue and pressed the parts together. Now that all of the body parts are in place and ready to go, I can start on prepping it before I start the painting process. Of course, I mark off all of the mold lines first to locate them so I see them clearly while sanding, and also to use it as a guide coat, so when I'm sanding I'm removing the black marker and therefore also removing the mold line. Once the black is gone, so should the mold line be as well. The panel lines were already pretty good to start with, though I still thought they could use some enhancement, so I took out my scriber and scribed them out a bit deeper so they wouldn't disappear after a couple coats of paint. The panel lines are scribed, the mold lines have been removed with the sanding sticks, so I could now move on to the final sanding before paint. The entire body was sanded with 600 grit sanding sponges to get rid of the rougher grit sanding from the sanding sticks, and also to rough up the rest of the body to get it ready for primer and to have that stick to it. All of the dust was removed from the body with a couple of brushes, and I blew it over with some air before I started applying the primer on those hard to reach, easy to forget spots, and then of course moving on to the rest of the body with a first nice coat. first coat went on pretty well. It wasn't really covering all that good, but that is done with the second coat. In between, I let it dry for about 5 minutes, let the paint in the airbrush, and then moved on to a second coat. Once the second coat was applied, it was nice and covered, so I let it sit and dry for about 15 minutes, then took out some 3000 grit sanding sponges to smooth it out even more. I just went over the entire body, sanding everything, removing all of the dust or any imperfections that might have been in the paint itself, before I move on to applying the color. I wanted to go for a nice dark green, and I found this metallic dark green in my stash. Now, after I applied the first coat, I quickly noticed that this wasn't as dark as I wanted it to be, so I let it at that first coat and then moved on to adding a base coat before adding more green. Now, in order to make this as dark as I can, the base coat would need to be black. In between coats and before I applied that base, I let it sit for about 5 minutes, cleaned out the airbrush, filled it with the black paint, and started carefully applying 2 coats of the black, making sure that everything is covered and fully ready for the green to go back on top of that in order to get that into a nice dark green. So as usual, the first coat is let to dry for about 5 minutes, filled up the airbrush again with some more paints to finish it off in the second coat. So after I finished applying the black, I was pretty much set on leaving it black, but then decided against it and just to go with the green instead, as I planned initially. So I mixed up the green, put it in the airbrush, and started applying a couple light coats. On top of the black base coat, the green is covering nice and quick and getting the real dark finish that I desired. Just to be sure, I added a second coat to get rid of any tiger striping and add paint onto all those areas that I might have missed. Once happy with the color, I set it aside for about 15 minutes to dry, applied the small BMW logos on the front and the rear, of course, and then could start mixing up the clear in order to make this all nice and shiny. The first coat went on really smooth and I was pretty satisfied with it already, but just to be sure that I didn't have orange peel in spots that I overlooked, I decided to add a quick second coat to finish it off.